greatest impact? Well, we're joined from Westminster by Simon Lancaster, who runs Bespoke, a speech writing consultancy. And a very good afternoon to you. So, who stood out for you?
Well, I thought it was a split between two camps, that you had kind of like the mods and the rockers. So the mods were, Clegg, Cameron, and Ed Miliband, the slick, suave, sophisticated, very, very similar, all born within 3 years of each other, all born within 40 miles of one another, very, very similar kind of privileged backgrounds. And then you had the rockers, who were a bit more ripe and ready, which included the fabulous ladies in red, Nigel Farage, and also Natalie Bennett, who could speak, they could be a bit more raw, a bit more ripe and ready in what they were saying. So overall, I think I agree with most of the polls this morning that Nicola Sturgeon was the standout exception for me. I suspect there are a few more people this morning who will be more relaxed about the prospect of the SNP playing a role in a coalition than they were yesterday.
And how do you make your judgment? Clearly, policy has to be part of what determines people's opinion, but how much from a speechwriter's point of view are you looking at other things, looking about getting their message across and the way in which they do that?
Well, I'm as a speechwriter, I don't really think so much about the kind of message that you get across. I don't think that speeches do convey messages so much as leaving people with impressions. And indeed, when you speak to people who watched the debate last night, this morning, they're not quoting or parroting what they heard people say last night, any of the leaders' messages. Rather, they're talking about the impressions they left. So they're saying things like, oh, Cameron looked a bit aloof, Ed Miliband looked a bit awkward. So as a speechwriter, this is always what I have in mind. What's the impression? What are people going to say when they're having a chat, down the pub or in the street about what they thought afterwards?
Isn't that slightly depressing when we're talking about an important election coming up?
It is, but I think through impressions we're able to judge character, and character is a critical part of being a leader. This is the way that we've always judged leaders throughout the ages. It's a kind of survival mechanism for the human race, if you like, that we're looking at people. We're like, are you strong enough to protect us as a people? Do we care about what you're saying? Does it sound as if what you're talking about is right? And these are the kind of measures that I think instinctively are going through viewers' minds as they're watching the debate. So I don't mind at all that impressions matter. I think impressions, actually, you can read a lot into people's body language, and body language is often more revealing and more honest, an indicator of what's going on in someone's head and their hearts than the actual words that are coming out of their mouth.
So what do you make of the impression that some of these leaders made and how they tried to manage that? We saw an awful lot of looking down the barrel of the camera, for example, didn't we?
We did indeed, with varying degrees of success. It's interesting you say looking down the barrel of a camera, because this is, if you talk about it as the barrel of a camera, then people are thinking about it as if it's a gun, and I had a feeling that this was maybe the way that Ed Miliband was looking at it, because he was trying so hard and he was kind of doing this big starey thing while he was looking down the camera, and I was watching at home and I was kind of recoiling. It made me feel really uncomfortable. It was almost like, it just felt really weird. Whereas Nick Clegg, as he did in 2010, he had a real love-in with the camera, and he was looking at it not as if he was looking at the barrel of a camera, looking at a weapon, but rather instead as if he was seeing directly into people's homes and he was just in your front room having a chat with you. So I think Clegg did it very well.
But
Cameron, I thought, was a bit strange last night. I normally have a very high regard for him as a speaker and as a communicator. But last night he seemed strangely distant, absent, remote, almost as if he was not there. I don't know whether his strategy was to try and look statesmanlike and try and transcend the whole debate in some kind of way, which would have been valid as a strategy, but I didn't feel it really worked. He just looked like he'd rather be somewhere else.
It's interesting that you praised Nick Clegg for his ability to reach out to people through a camera, and yet that didn't translate into votes necessarily, did it? Despite his success in the debates last time around. So really, do you think these debates, despite the fact they leave people with a certain impression, do you think they really have an impact on the way people vote?
Well, I think they're like stones that you throw in the river. You know, they can make a ripple, but the river's still going to go the way that it is going to go. But with all the polls, my view on reading the polls this morning, and I'm not a pollster, but my view is more what matters is who overperformed against their ratings in the polls, the usual polls, the voter intention polls, and who underperformed against those ratings. Because most people watch these programmes as a kind of exercise in validation, as a way of proving that what they already think is right, the person they think is right for the job is right. And so by that measure, using the mods and rockers analogy that I was using earlier, all of the mods underperformed against their poll ratings and the rockers largely overperformed.
OK, well, Simon Lancaster, very interesting to get your take on it. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Anna.
Now, a sailor who was thought to have been lost at sea has been described